President Trump signed an executive order this morning which aims to bring down the price of prescription medication in America. The order aims to end global freeloading by making America, quote unquote, the most favored nation in pricing for these drugs. But what does that ultimately mean for consumers, and how will it be done? Here to discuss this and much more is U.S. Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. He is a member of 4 Senate committees, including the Senate Budget Committee. Senator Johnson, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, so explain, if you can, how this executive order will work in terms of bringing down prices for prescription medication.
I really can't. I certainly understand how grossly unfair it seems where drug companies find other markets that also control drug pricing, and so they decide to take a cut in their margin to provide that as a marginal income. But again, if they are then forced to sell that same drug to the customers here in America, they may just choose not to sell that drug to those other countries, which means they won't make that marginal profit, which could actually result in driving up the drug costs. So, again, anytime the federal government intervenes in the marketplace, it's kind of hard to say exactly what those market forces may do. Again, I understand the appeal to it.
Right.
I understand, well, it should bring down drug prices. I'm not sure it will.
Well, Senator, can I say thank you for being honest in that? Because I was going to ask you this question because I'm struggling. I haven't read all of the executive order, but in principle, we have a free market system. Republicans were very critical of Joe Biden when he was president for putting a cap on insulin. Remember back in the Inflation Reduction Act, and it actually led to a shortage of that drug because there was no profit margin in it for the manufacturers. I was critical of that. Many Republicans were critical of that. Do you see this as actually being different in some way?
Again, it may be. I do know of other businesses that have kind of, global businesses have taken that same tack and it worked out well on certain drugs, but to just say universally this is going to work to bring down drug prices, it may on some, it may not in others. It could lead to drug shortages in other areas as well. So again, I'm just not real fond of government intervention in the marketplace. I think the free market works well. The problem you have in healthcare is we don't have a functioning free market there either, because you have third-party payers. You don't have consumers who really care much about what they pay. In general, they don't like paying the high insurance rates. But the third-party payer system is probably the greatest assault on the free market that we have, and has really driven up healthcare costs across the board, including pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, and so when you look at basic economic principles, it's hard to predict what might happen because we don't have a pure market-based system. As you said, a third-party payer, Medicare, Medicaid, it skews it all because government is so heavily involved in our healthcare system. But generally speaking, when government gets involved, the outcome is generally not good. Although I do think Big Pharma has taken advantage of people, and as I understand this process, R&D costs are often paid by American consumers, and other countries get the benefits of the lower prices. And I certainly understand the president's desire to make America at least pay what other countries pay and not pay more than they do. It's a noble undertaking, to say the least. Let me shift gears, Senator, to the news of China and the U.S. decreasing their respective tariffs on one another by 115%. It looks like the markets have responded very positively to that.
Well, by lowering the tariffs, you're not disrupting supply chains to the extent that they were disrupted. It's brought a little bit more certainty and stability. I think this is the market's reaction is hope that this dramatic trade war is over, and that both sides are kind of standing down and trying to figure out something that'll work. But again, from my standpoint, the sooner that we can move past the trade wars, where we can understand, okay, here are the rules of the road. This is what the tariffs will or won't be. That will bring certainty and stability to the economy, which is what private sector investors are looking for. I mean, I'm talking to, whether it's the National Association of Manufacturers, Business Roundtable, individual businesses, economists. I mean, capital investment has, in many cases, dried up. I know President Trump is saying all these people have committed, and that may be true, and that's a good thing. But on an individual company basis, people right now are just kind of sitting by the sidelines going, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not going to risk my capital at this point in time, and that's something the administration needs to be concerned about.
Yeah, that touches on the next topic I want to talk about on the reconciliation, tax cuts, that is causing a lot of people to hold back from investments. But I just want one more question on the tariffs. I mean, I don't know that we can ever get to a place of parity with China just because we're the consumer and they're the manufacturer. I'm not sure what success looks like there.
Well, again, there are certain products we have to figure out some way to incentivize reshoring them. Critical things like high-end semiconductors, pharmaceutical precursors, active pharmaceutical ingredients, rare earth minerals. I mean, there's a number of things that we need to figure out. How do we incentivize people to do it here in America? One of the best ways would be don't tax them. Don't over-regulate them.
Right.
You have to do that in targeted fashion from that standpoint. Otherwise, again, I think America has benefited tremendously from global trade. Right now we don't have enough workers, so I would not recommend bringing back high labor content products. Let the billions of people who are underemployed in the rest of the world, let them provide those to us in a very cheap way, particularly when we don't have enough workers.
All right, let's talk about budget reconciliation. Where do things currently stand in the Senate? I spoke to the House Speaker over the weekend. He's still optimistic that they might get something out by Memorial Day.
Well, my big focus is on spending. I've got a pretty good video pinned to the top of my X page. All Republican leaders saying that we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. But it sure seems like most of the emphasis has been on the whole tax cut side. And by the way, I would just extend current tax law. I wouldn't need anything for it. If we would have been smart enough to do it in 2017, all our tax treatment would have been permanent to begin with. So I would just extend that and take a massive automatic tax increase off the table. I would have also filed the Senate reconciliation, provide the border and defense funding, have $850 billion of real spending reduction. That's almost half of more than half what the House is talking about right now. But Tony, we're going to spend more than $89 trillion over the next 10 years, according to CBO's latest projection. $89 trillion. At most, the House is talking about reducing that by $1.5 trillion, which isn't even 2%.
Right.
I've been recommending that we need to focus on returning to pre-pandemic spending levels. I provided options ranging somewhere between 5.5 and 6.5 trillion, compared to the 7 trillion we'll spend this year and maybe 7.3 trillion next year. So my proposal would save something like $8 trillion over 10 years. So from my standpoint, we're a long way from being where we need to be in this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to shrink the size of government back to a pre-pandemic level.
Senator, and we talked about that before, I agree with your approach. I mean, if you adjust it for inflation, you go back to those pre-pandemic levels, why are we spending that money? We're no longer in a pandemic, but that's the nature of government. Once you create it, it stays and never goes away. Unfortunately, it appears that in the House, they're wrestling with just modest cuts to dialing back some of the expansions of Medicaid to shore up that program. I don't understand why your colleagues can't grasp this moment that you described that we have. It's a once-in-a-lifetime moment to dial government back within its boundaries.
Because people like free federal funding. And I've heard it said that show me a member of Congress who ever lost because they spent too much money. In my Wall Street Journal column, which should go online here shortly, I point out in World War II, we started World War II spending about 11.7% of GDP. That increased to 41% of GDP, but by I think 1948, 3 years after the war, we were back down to 11.4%. So we know it's possible. Back then, Congress and President Truman realized that World War II was an extraordinary, once-in-a-lifetime thing. You couldn't keep spending at those levels. The pandemic was a once-in-a-lifetime thing as well. but we didn't stop spending at those levels. We went up from 4.4 to 6.5. We pretty well averaged that. This year we'll spend about $7 trillion. No family, if they had an illness and they had to borrow $50,000 to spend it on medical bills, if that member got well, they wouldn't keep borrowing $50,000 to
Right.
spend at that level, but that's exactly what we're doing. So we have to change this. This is our once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. That's why I'm signaling right now, if we don't do a far better job, if the president doesn't get behind leading return to pre-pandemic level spending, I don't see this thing passing in the Senate. I can't support it.
All right. Well, we're going to continue to track that and have conversations with you. I agree with you on this, Senator. Thanks so much for joining us. Always great to see you.
Have a great day.